Yesterday I made a small video about Tommy Robinson, and I'm going to do this. I'm going to do so again, uh, as measured as I can make it, and as clear as I can make it. That this isn't a signal that I'm suddenly supporting Tommy Robinson. I'm not. Um, but I know people who know Tommy Robinson. I know people who've known Tommy Robinson, and he comes across as a relatively positive individual. And I imagine, you'd have a very nice cup of tea with him. And he's not a threat. And that's really the point here. He's not a threat. His real name, Stephen Yaxley Lennon. He remains one of the most divisive figures in contemporary British politics. He's rightly been held accountable for spreading false, damaging claims about a Syrian refugee, breaching an injunction, undermining court authority. But that shouldn't result in this sort of string of um, what seem frankly vexatious uh, sentences. And let's say he is correctly serving an 18-month sentence. Let's say so far so just. But then the question is whether justice ends with that sentence, or whether in Robinson's case we've slipped into an extrajudicial system of extra punishment, the kind that contradicts the rule of law under the pretense of security. And this is something that parallels the case of Julian Assange, and that parallels the case of Gay, I can't remember her other name now. Anyway, the lady whose legs and wrists were too big for the monitoring bracelets that the prison system has got, and so for the inadequacy of the prison sentence, she serves extra time. Let's begin with the facts. Yaxley Lennon has been held in segregation at HMP Woodhill since November, having previously been moved from HMP Belmarsh after racist and abusive emails targeted the prison's black female governor. The Ministry of Justice justifies his segregation on grounds of safety. Two inmates allegedly plotted to assault him, and intelligence suggests a lifer intends to kill him. And the High Court, in dismissing his challenge today, made clear that segregation is not punishment but protection. And perhaps in a literal sense that's true. He's permitted daily exercise, gym use, Bible study, painting work, and has access to healthcare and social visits. This isn't solitary confinement in the strict legal sense. Yet we must interrogate a deeper principle. Is Robinson being punished twice in a way that seems inappropriate? Once by the courts and now by the state via some sort of indefinite isolation. Segregation, that he says, is driving him to the brink of madness. And the law recognises that prison is punishment enough. Any further restriction must be proportionate, necessary, and humane. People are kept in solitary confinement if they are a danger to others. People are kept in solitary confinement if they've been violent. Yaxley Lennon has not been violent, he's a pussycat. If segregation becomes effectively indefinite, it becomes punitive by consequence, if not by design. And Robinson has described it as destroying his mind. His lawyers have pointed to PTSD and ADHD. There's no evidence he's a risk to others. The threat is to him, and yet, bizarrely, he's the one paying the price. And I don't understand this. I know how incarceration in a place can drive you bonkers. I know it can. I was incarcerated in a flat for a month for a TV program. Yes, I had the pleasure of being walked up to a garden on the top floor every so often, and down to play around on a treadmill like a gerbil, my J.D. Vance moment. But otherwise, I was sort of kept on my own with a television, and it does drive you a little bit nutty. And I had this voice talking to me from above, the voice of God, questioning my motives, questioning what I was doing, night and day. And in the end, what happens is you become compliant and your sense of agency goes. And that's the bit where you topple into madness if you're not careful. And yes, prison must protect inmates, but civilized societies, we don't protect people by isolating them until they break, mentally or emotionally. If he'd been assaulted, there would be uproar. But being preemptively isolated for 9 months on the basis of threats that may or may not materialize is that acceptable? The problem is not that the prison service is being negligent, it's that the system, in the name of security, has created an environment in which long-term segregation becomes as a slow motion punishment with minimal accountability or oversight. If there's somebody threatening him in this prison, move him to another prison. Robinson is, in legal terms, a civil prisoner. His offence, while serious, is not violent, nor is he a terror threat, and he has fewer liberties than some violent offenders in the general population. His request to move to a vulnerable prisoners unit was rejected by him because he doesn't want to associate with sex offenders. That's a moral stand, not a disciplinary offence. Now, some will argue that Robinson has brought this on himself, that his political activism invites backlash. Perhaps. But if the personal risk posed by one's beliefs is enough to justify preemptive isolation, then we are accepting that the threat of violence trumps a prisoner's rights. We are enabling a system where popular speech and its consequences result in administrative exile. We must be really careful not to confuse protection with punishment, or to believe that the latter is justified because we dislike the man in the cell. The European Convention on Human Rights, and I know there's a lot of people here who won't like me even mentioning that, Article 3 prohibits inhuman or degrading treatment, and the court has ruled that Robinson's conditions don't meet that threshold. But thresholds shift. And mental health, substance abuse, extended isolation, these are warning signs. And you've got to remember the principles of, what's it called now? The the system which was instituted by the British Army and the Israeli Army to train people to resist torture. It's something I looked into, and it produces compliance, and both in reality TV and I think in Tommy Robinson's case, this is what he is subjected to. And that means that the longer he's kept in isolation, the longer he's kept in these conditions, the closer he gets to PTSD and so on. Prison isn't a moral gulag. And Tommy Robinson, however odious some people may find him, has already been punished by the courts. If we allow that punishment to be extended quietly, indefinitely, and without due process, we're not defending the law, we are hollowing out the law, and we are ourselves conniving at something which is deeply illegal, deeply illiberal, and I think deeply immoral.